At Bursa Malaysia, we give you access to all kinds of doors, so you can profit from all kinds of opportunities. You'll find doors that lead to businesses as old as the land itself, doors that open to the future and the wealth of opportunities that await. Some doors open multiple pathways for you and for everyone else. And they are supported by the doors that unlock the energy that powers everyday life. There are doors to solutions that are good for people and the planet. And doors that hold new ideas, new ways of connecting data that can change everything we think we know. There are even doors that empower everyone through values that are fair, just, and transparent. While others bring the world to us to shape our brightest minds, you can open doors that take you across the world with just a click, or give you access to the economic roots of the ASEAN. We connect businesses and investors of all sizes. At Bursa Malaysia, businesses raise funds and gain visibility, while investors seize opportunities to grow their wealth. Trust and rely on us. Open the doors, step in, and create the impact you seek. Bursa Malaysia, creating opportunities, growing value. At Bursa Malaysia, we give you access to all kinds of doors, so you can profit from all kinds of opportunities. You'll find doors that lead to businesses as old as the land itself, doors that open to the future and the wealth of opportunities that await. Some doors open multiple pathways for you and for everyone else. And they are supported by the doors that unlock the energy that powers everyday life. There are doors to solutions that are good for people and the planet. And doors that hold new ideas, new ways of connecting data that can change everything we think we know. There are even doors that empower everyone through values that are fair, just, and transparent. While others bring the world to us to shape our brightest minds, you can open doors that take you across the world with just a click, or give you access to the economic roots of the ASEAN. We connect businesses and investors of all sizes. At Bursa Malaysia, businesses raise funds and gain visibility, while investors seize opportunities to grow their wealth. Trust and rely on us. Open the doors, step in, and create the impact you seek. Bursa Malaysia, creating opportunities, growing value.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wahlul 'uqdatam min lisani yafqahu qawli. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Hello and welcome everyone. We're back here again with the fourth series of Shariah Investing Dialogue, or SID for short, for this year. This event is proudly brought to you by Bursa Malaysia, together with our co-organizers, the Association of Shariah Advisors in Islamic Finance, ASAS, and International Shariah Research Academy for Islamic Finance, ISRA. My name is Nadira, and I would like to remind our viewers to always be mindful of your surroundings and stay vigilant in maintaining the habit of personal hygiene care now that most of the world are transitioning into an endemic. Before I begin, I'm happy to remind everyone on a few things. Number one, Islamic Markets TV is a broadcasting platform for the halal economy where global leaders and market experts come together to share key market insights, latest developments, and best practices in the industry. Number two, you'll see a text box on your right where you can submit your questions for the speakers anytime during our live. And number three, you can take notes during our live sessions by looking at your right screen. Click the tab next to Ask Questions so that you can take notes during the live session. Thank you. For your information, we have carried out 3 other SID series this year, discussing on interesting topics such as sustainable and responsible investing within the notion of Maqasid al-Shariah, sustainability and value-based intermediation (VBI) in Islamic capital markets, as well as Sharia investing as a tool towards financial and social inclusion. You may rewatch all these previous sessions on Islamic Markets Live platform. Today, we are interested on how the Islamic finance industry may build back better, paving the way for a sustainable and inclusive post-pandemic recovery. Let us begin. In this first session, we will discuss on the economic impact of COVID-19, the role of Islamic finance and environmental, social and governance factors, where this session will focus on collaborative efforts in managing the impact of COVID-19 pandemic and lockdown, resetting foundation and reprioritizing resources for a durable recovery, and revisiting Islamic finance and ESG factors in response to a global crisis. Our speaker for this session would be Yang Berbahagia Tan Sri Dr. Jamila Mahmud, Executive Director of Sunway Center for Planetary Health. Tan Sri Jamila is a medical professional with more than 2 decades of experience in managing crises in health, disasters, and conflict settings. She is currently Executive Director of the newly established Sunway Center for Planetary Health in Malaysia. She was the Special Advisor to the Prime Minister of Malaysia on Public Health from April 2020 to August 2021. She is also a member of the Government of Malaysia's Economic Action Council and Climate Action Council. Her previous appointments include the Under-Secretary General for Partnerships at the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies IFRC, Chief of the World Humanitarian Summit Secretariat at the United Nations, and Chief of the Humanitarian Response Branch at UNFPA. She is the founder of Mercy Malaysia, a Southern-based international humanitarian organization. Tan Sri graduated as a Doctor of Medicine, has a Master's in Obstetrics and Gynecology from the same university, and is a Fellow of the Royal College of OBGYN, United Kingdom. She also completed executive education at the International Management and Development Centre, IMD Lausanne. This session will be held moderated by Associate Professor Dr. Mohammed Iskandar Shah Muhammad Rashid, Hamad bin Khalifa University, Qatar Foundation. Associate Professor Dr. Mohammed Iskandar Shah is currently an Associate Professor at the College of Islamic Studies, Hamad bin Khalifa University, HBKU, Qatar Foundation. He holds a PhD in Finance from University of Nottingham, United Kingdom. He also holds a Master in International Economics and Finance from University of Queensland, Australia, and a Bachelor in Business Administration or Finance from International Islamic University Malaysia, IIUM. Prior to joining HBKU, Dr. Iskandar was an Associate Professor and Associate Dean of School of Graduate and Professional Studies at the International Centre for Education in Islamic Finance, INSEF, a postgraduate university specializing in Islamic finance established by Bank Negara Malaysia. He was also an Assistant Professor at Department of Finance, Kuliah of Economics and Management Science, IIUM. His main teaching and research interests are in the area of corporate finance, portfolio management, and Islamic capital market. Dr. Iskandar is also a subject matter expert for Securities Industry Development Corporation, SIDC, and a regular speaker or trainer for many conferences and executives programs. He is also involved in several consultancy projects with government agency and financial institutions such as Ministry of Energy Malaysia, Afghanistan Ministry of Finance, CIMB Islamic Bank, Responsible Finance Institute, RFI, and Zico Shariah Advisory. With this, I will pass the session over to Dr. Iskandar.
Okay, Assalamualaikum, and very good morning to everyone. Probably good evening in Malaysia, so it's still morning in Qatar though. Thank you so much, Nadira, for kindly introducing myself and also Tan Sri Dr. Jamila. Again, it's a great honor always to have a conversation with Tan Sri. First time I met Tan Sri in Switzerland many years ago. I think she was still under IFRC. And even then, Tan Sri was talking about the role of Islamic finance, how we can preempt the crisis, how we should be prepared for it, how we can create food security, water security. So, Tan Sri is a person with all these kind of ideas. Probably she has this foresight of, seeing what might happen. And this pandemic, in fact, is a concept that we have to take it seriously as well. I think that's very important. So that's why we're having this conversation. Tan Sri, good to have you. It's always a pleasure.
Good to see you again, Prof.
Good to see you, Tan Sri. Maybe we can get start this conversation, Tan Sri. Every time we talk about crisis, right, Tan Sri? 2008, in fact, the dot-com bubble, and even now the pandemic. So there's always this discussion that we should think differently. Maybe Islamic finance can play a role in everything. So Tan Sri, are we? In 2008 they say we missed the boat. We didn't do enough in terms of getting people attention toward Islamic finance. So are we repeating the same mistake, Tan Sri, or are we doing things differently this time around? Please, Tan Sri.
Yeah, thank you very much, Prof. Iskandar. That's a really important and a really good question. In my opinion, we have missed the boat again. We all saw this coming. Anyone who worked in crisis management saw this pandemic coming. Pandemics happen in cycles. The last major pandemic we had was more than 100 years ago, and it was about time. And we also had all the telltale signs. We had SARS, we had MERS, all the other coronaviruses that were emerging. And so when COVID-19 happened, I was really shocked that people were surprised, because it was something that was going to happen, not a question of when, or not a question of if, but a question of when. Now, you had alluded to the fact that I have been really, pushing the Islamic finance sector to look at better instruments to prepare ourselves for crises. And in particular, when you look at crises that impact the lives of millions of people globally, especially in a pandemic, we did not, put these instruments into play. And as a result, what has happened is that there's major suffering around the world. And I really, really hope this time, through this dialogue, we start to put in measures to build and prepare for that next pandemic. It's a question of when and not if.
Okay, Tan Sri. I mean, we keep on, I'm not trying to, defend Islamic finance, or I'm not trying to, but just to try to create this conversation. So you were talking about instrument. I remember when we met, you were saying that, we need to push multilateral institutions, especially the one which is related to Islamic finance, like IDB or even central banks. So are we saying that, the signs were there, but there is still lack of coordination at the multilateral level toward pushing Islamic finance agenda at a much bigger scale?
Yes, the signs were there. And I think it's not just multilateral tools, but also bilateral and national tools as well, and quite localized, I would say, tools that we need to look at as well. So let me give you some examples. It's easier for us to picture it when we have some examples. If you knew a pandemic was a matter of when it might happen, we may have already set up some mechanisms for vaccine procurement and distribution. Right now, we cannot get this pandemic under control because there's a huge vaccine inequity. As long as there are people, millions of people around the world, only 3% of Africa is vaccinated. As long as there are millions of people who are not vaccinated, then the virus will continue to mutate. Just when we thought we were recovering, Delta came and hit us. There will be future mutations likely until we get more people vaccinated. Now, in 2014, 2015, Gavi had already worked with some Islamic finance institutions to build a Gavi Sukuk for vaccines. It was hugely successful. Why didn't we, from 2015, start preparing a sukuk for vaccines so that we could have, equal distributions of vaccines around the world? That's one. Number two, when you look at the social inequities that has been exposed with the pandemic, we've ripped apart the Band-Aid that was holding a lot of people together. And what's happened is that it's exposed such great vulnerabilities and such great inequities. Surely the financial instruments that can be designed through Islamic finance, whether it's a blended model, taking Islamic social finance together with, whether it's the, sukuk or and using impact measurements, for example, impact outcome financing through conventional philanthropy or other means. We could have been more innovative. We could have been more creative. You and I know that we worked together to end cholera. We were trying to do this so badly for a few years. The cost that we predicted was only 40 million, and yet we could not raise that 40 million in a world in Islamic finance that's worth billions and billions of dollars. Our short-sightedness continues till today. And I think that, this is a wake-up call that we need to really sit down, bring a number of people together, look at the foresight and the data, and build the instruments we need for tomorrow.
Okay, Tan Sri, before we move on to the next topic, right, I just want to wrap up by asking you this. If it's so straightforward, right, to issue, for example, like a sukuk, and let's say like Malaysia, we did the sustainable sukuk, and it's oversubscribed by 6 times, and the instruments were there, the ecosystem were there, the mechanism were there. So is that the questions that who wants to do first, or who should take the leadership? because like you are rightly pointed out, the fact that, we are dealing with multi-trillion-dollar business here. So raising, for example, $500 million or even 1 billion, to ensure equality of vaccine might not be a big issue. So I'm not trying to pointing to a certain direction, the problem is lack of leadership or whatsoever and everything. So who should take responsibility of this, Tan Sri?
That's a really important question. I think it boils down to will. How do people like me make the business case to people in the audience today that it really is, number one, very important because, the pandemic has eroded so many profits from many companies. But of course, it's made some much richer. But the second thing is it saves lives. And the third thing is you look at the recovery will be less painful when you actually prepare better for crises like this. So I also need to better understand why is it so hard for people to accept this proposition that we need to work together. And I think it requires a really strong collaboration from people who understand crisis to people who understand finance and find that middle ground for us to build these new solutions together. I don't profess to be an expert at all. I'm an Islamic finance expert wannabe, but it's fascinating because I do not see any other instrument that is really about justice and social justice. And this is about equity and justice. This is about saving lives. This is about ensuring that we can all be, able to thrive in the aftermath of a crisis like this. So I think it does require that, political, and I say political in inverted commas, not meaning just politics of government, but politics of business as well, the political will to actually, commit to looking long term and that patient investment that needs to be put in place for us to then be able to reap the benefits when we need that, that when that crisis hits, and so you're not caught unprepared again.
Thank you, Tan Sri. Okay, now I think the discussion is nicely, we managed to put few issues on the table right now. So let's move on. So crisis always asks us to rethink, and the words that being keep on thrown to us is that, okay, reset. And currently there's a big discussion going on, COP26. So pandemic is one issue. A bigger issue now is climate change. And I'm sure, Tan Sri, with my conversation with you, in fact, when you were in itself, accepting the honorary doctorate and everything, so you keep on saying that, okay, we have to push and push and push our ideas forward. So now the question is that we have an opportunity. The world is coming together because climate change is real, pandemic is real, people are dying, and we can't live normally anymore. We just live in fear. Apprehension, trepidations become a very common words that being used. So, and we need to create hope now, Tan Sri. I think it's our responsibility to create a positive narrative. So how do you see, Tan Sri, moving forward, the word reset can create a positive narrative, not only for Malaysia, but for a global community, from your view, Tan Sri?
Prof. Iskandar, you're absolutely right. COVID-19 was just a dress rehearsal. What we're seeing in terms of the impact on people's lives in COVID-19 is nothing compared to the impact of climate change and our biodiversity loss. So I come from a planetary health perspective now. Even the COVID pandemic, it didn't come out of the blue. It has arisen because we as human beings in this age of Anthropocene have violated what we call the planetary health, planetary boundaries of our world. There are 9 indicators in the planetary boundaries that was established by the Stockholm Resilience Center a number of years ago. So because of that, to cut the long story short, we've lost biodiversity, we have encroached into wildlife, areas of their habitation. We have urbanized in a way that has created a lot of problems. So the zoonotic leak, or the leak of viruses jumping from animals to humans, will happen inadvertently. Now we need to go back and re-examine ourselves, whether it's a climate crisis or pandemic, the root causes are the same. It is man's behavior. So if we are to prevent the next pandemic, if we are to prevent, the or mitigate the impact. Can't prevent. Honestly, I feel we've passed the 1.5. It's really hard to reverse that. But how do you mitigate and adapt to that climate crisis that we have? We are in a climate crisis. All right. So I think there are a couple of things. One is, how do you apply Maqasid Shariah, which is so perfect in its whole entity, the protection of humanity, the protection of the environment, all that is already embodied in our Maqasid Shariah. That can then, develop the financial tools, the behavioral changes that needs to happen at individual level, the behavior at community level. So as we move into this, looking at the climate crisis that looms, above us, so we have to rethink, what does good development mean? What does the whole sustainability agenda look like in the future that is beyond ticking the boxes of ESG, but really, a very conscious action and awareness, I guess, at individual, company, community, government level. So as we go to COP26, we have all sorts of companies saying they're going to be zero target by 2050 and so forth. What does that look like? How do we hold people to account? Where does our accountability lie now? Who's going to demand that? And I think, honestly, if you ask me what the hope is in the young, in the people who will be out there demanding from, their leaders that they actually protect the environment. Let me just give you one example. The way we farm, the way we eat, the way we consume. Most of the farming and large-scale farming is done with the use of antibiotics, right? To get better stock, better quality, and so forth. Now, the big health crisis that is looming ahead of us is actually antimicrobial resistance, that we estimate 10 million people will die because antibiotics won't work on them anymore. Now, that is entirely preventable if we all start cutting down, our meat consumption, that we go back to, free range and, much more conventional farming methods, and that the whole world moves towards a plant-based diet. I mean, these are things that will require us to make some sacrifices, some personal changes. So, for example, the travel, the fact that we can actually have a conversation like this with hundreds of people around the world shows us that we can do good things together without having to fly across the world and burn all the fossil fuels that we are doing. And how do we then demand from those who are using fossil fuels to really change the way we consume our energy and so on and so forth? So we need this very, very urgently, because the implications and the death and destruction from the climate crisis is much worse than COVID.
Okay, Tan Sri. I mean, before we move towards much more local issues and everything, I just want to follow up the point that you're trying to make. Crisis and finance. Putting together, shaping people behavior. So we have a common narrative, capitalism, create jobs, create opportunity. So now we want to bring the Maqasid in. So then people start saying that, okay, we need to shape our behavior so that if not do this, this will happen, that will happen, so on and so forth. So now the bigger question is that, what is the incentive for people to change their behavior? I know we know the answers as well, but I think it's good to point to the audience that what are the few things that you have highlighted, like, change your diet, so on and so forth. But beyond that, what else that we can do in terms of shaping a positive behavior? I mean, we missed the 1.5, and it's really scary that when we miss 1.5, we know what's going to happen. In fact, some parts of the world will be underwater very soon if we don't do anything about this anyway. So at the individual level, but what about the government level, Tan Sri? Do you think that the government is doing enough? I mean, globally. Do we have a structured narrative for everybody to follow? For example, I mean, Malaysia, maybe we are quite advanced when it comes to policy making. But do we have the playbook that we can say, okay, you want to do this, why don't you do this A, B, C, D and everything? So who's working on their playbook now, Tan Sri? I mean, you've been at the global level, so probably you can share some on this.
Well, the recent UNFCCC report, the Code Red for Humanity was called, very clear guidelines on what we can do. And I don't think we're short of policies and tools. What we are short of is implementation, right? And being held to account for what we say we are going to do, we need to do. So I think that, that aspect is going to be very critical. But I think, at individual level, I think awareness is very important. How do we bring, the awareness of the climate crisis, all the things that are happening in the world today to the public eye in ways that are not complicated? And this is my ambition being in the Planetary Health Center. How do you demystify the science and make it something that everyone understands? I think if I look at the COVID pandemic, I think it's a huge opportunity. It's touched every one of us. Whether you're rich or poor, COVID has affected every single person, whether they're in a developing world or a developed world. And if anything, this is a time to reflect, to really re-examine, our individual behaviors, but also our a collective responsibility at community level, national level, and at the global level. So I think that the Malaysian government is saying all the right things, right? Now what we need to do is make sure that we support, we encourage, we hold them to account to actually deliver on the things that they say they're going to do. The other thing, of course, is that, I come from a crisis background, right? So we need to be continually working to prepare for the next one and the next one. So I think that if I look at Islamic finance, the instruments in Islamic finance are there for us to prepare. Now, let me give you a very specific example of the health system. So part of my work with the government was to look at what does an ideal health system look like to be able to support the challenges that we will face continually. We have an aging population in Malaysia. We have the highest level of non-communicable diseases. We are obese as a nation. We have health systems that are dichotomous, which means you have public or private. So, we need to look at, for example, takaful. We need to look at sukuk. We need to look at how we finance our health system so that when we do have a crisis, anyone, whether they are from the B40 group or M20, whatever group they come from, has access to healthcare. Instead of the government subsidizing high costs in private care, which is what happened with COVID-19 when government hospitals were overwhelmed, if we had a decent health insurance system, we could have allowed, the poor access to private health care early as well. So I think there's a lot of lessons we can take from this pandemic. I think that no one country, and I say this with a lot of humility, not even the US, the UK right now, everyone is struggling. The NHS is also struggling, but they have a massive NHS. So we need to make sure that our health systems are also seamless, and what financial instruments can we apply that would help us support health financing in our country.
Okay, Tan Sri, we have another 50 minutes or so. I'm still waiting for the questions from the audience to come in. But I personally have something to ask you as well. You've been in Malaysia, you've been in many parts of the world. It seems that people are very clear about the narrative. A lot of reports are being published. A lot of, thoughts are being put into it. So it's always boiled down to, okay, where the money going to come from? Okay, and I always trying to figure out this paradox. You have individuals, I don't have to mention the name, who worth about 250 billion US dollar in this world, individual, one person. And we are really talking about, having space tourism on one hand, right? So huge amount of investment and money is going there. On the other hand, when we talk to you, for example, we're still talking about fundamental issues. Water, healthcare, and so on and so forth. So, this is a big question, and I know this is not something difficult or something easy to answer. But are we losing a sense of humanity, Tan Sri? Are we losing it? Is the current system that we have embraced are not able to see what's right and what's wrong? It's a very philosophical thing, but I just want to get your opinion on this.
Iskandar, I'm an incurable optimist, and this is the only reason why I can continue working in crisis. I think that crisis also brings out the best in all of us. And we've seen this. We've seen even in Malaysia how humanity wins, how people come together to support each other. And I cannot stop believing in that humanity. I think what's needed is that we have to look at what are the incentives and disincentives for wealth. Why there is no wealth tax that is, will allow us to, provide for those who are, really in need and who need support. I think that the government has a role, no doubt, but, the government can only shoulder that much, especially in a crisis like the pandemic, which has really, put us on our knees in terms of the economic impact. Let's not look at the people who went send people to space and, Tesla now shares soaring, like crazy. Let's look at ourselves, right? In the Muslim world, when you talk about Islamic finance, we're not short of financing either. But, how do we wake these people up that, you live on the world for such a finite amount of time. And, what will it take? I don't know. Maybe I need to get in front of these people and show them the data that, we are only able to protect ourselves if we are able to protect others. And we live in such a global, interconnected world now. We're not isolated. So, so I think from the government perspective, I think wealth tax is very important. If you look at, for example, the more egalitarian societies, the Swedens of the world, then you will see that they can cope, right? Their resilience is much better.
Okay, Tan Sri, we have some questions from the audience. They are fantastic questions. I'm not sure whether we can finish up in 15 minutes, but let me just ask a couple first. Okay, the first question is that why not set up a social enterprise or like a special purpose vehicle or special purpose companies? Instead of relying on the public listed companies, banks or corporates, and driving this vaccine agenda. So what are your thoughts on this, Tan Sri?
Yes, why not? I mean, social enterprise is always something that brings change. But if you're looking at impact and large scale impact, then whether we like it or not, it's sovereign funds that actually drive that. I mean, you look at if you want to look at vaccine, if you want to say you want to set up a vaccine sukuk or some kind of financial instrument, you're talking about many billion dollars. And I think most social enterprises are not that size. I'm not saying that it's not useful, but certainly for that. Why is the Muslim world not able to have its own, sort of CDC or vaccine research and production capacity? And to that note, let me just take off my hat or whatever to the Africans, right? How the Africans came together and said, we will manufacture our vaccines and, take care of our people. So I think we've got to have, I don't want it to be very nationalistic and individualistic, but as a collective globally, how do we look at this issue of equity in a much broader perspective, but also to inspire the Muslim world that we really got to get our act together. We are 1/8 of the population, 1.8 billion of the population, to really buck up, right, scientifically as well as in finance.
Okay, Tan Sri, this is a very good one. I think I can ask this question to you and to the other panelists as well. So why does Islamic finance continue to ride on the false narrative that is aligned with sustainability, but yet in reality, the conventional approach to sustainability have achieved great strides through a science-driven mechanism? So why does Islamic finance allow this sustainability gap to broaden? And how should Islamic finance respond differently? I think you have answered most of it.
Yeah, that's the same question I would ask. Why have we not caught up, right? And I think maybe the more learned Islamic finance experts around us can answer that.
Okay, but maybe this one is relevant to you, Tan Sri. Okay, what accountability and governance measures should be put in place to push policymakers and corporates to be more responsible? I mean, you probably have thousands of conversation with these people. All right, so tell us what you tell them. So yeah.
Yeah, I think the first thing I tell them is that this has to be, it has to be organic, right? Your staff, your human capital in your corporations have to feel that it is important for them to be working in a company that is socially responsible and, will look at sustainability beyond a tick in the box or some consultant writing a nice report at the end of each year. And this is precisely what happens. I think that Malaysia is making a lot of positive moves. Bursa KL, Securities Commission, the Ministry of Finance. I mean, they're all saying the right things. So what we now have to do is to make sure that, number one, they need to tell us how they want us to hold them accountable. Is there some public accountability mechanism that we can have? If it's going to be publicly published, for the public to look at, how does social enterprise now and how does civil society, keep the checks and balances and be partners to these corporations or to government to say, if you say this is what you're doing now, let us verify on the ground that this is really what's happening. And it has to be beyond that, as I said, the box ticking exercise and the nice reports. So I think the more people are aware that it is our responsibility, it's not the responsibility of the corporation or the government, it's actually our responsibility at individual and community level to actually live in a more sustainable way and demand that of our leadership, demand that of our corporations, then it will happen. But at the moment, you do have, it's easy for us to say this, but there are people who are struggling who say, I can't think about sustainability. I'm thinking of the next meal I'll put in front of my family. So let's get real here. Talking about sustainability is the privilege of people who have enough. But so that equity issue comes back again. There should be no one who is poor in Malaysia. We have enough wealth, we have enough zakat, we have everything. Why is it that we haven't applied it to ensure that there is that equity, that equity issue that we need to address? But at the end of the day, it's still awareness, it's still understanding why it's so important to live sustainably, and then demanding that of those who have committed to that sustainability agenda.
Before I leave you, but I need to ask you this. Pandemic or climate change, I'm not sure. Am I still with you guys? Because I am not moving at all.
Yeah.
Am I?
Yes, yes.
Okay. Okay, all right. Suddenly, like, my picture froze. But anyway, so before I let you go, Tan Sri, I just need to ask you this. Pandemic or climate change or anything is supposed to be the great equalizer. It's supposed to bring everyone to the table and try to look at policies, and Tan Sri have really highlighted those things and everything. But somehow people on the street get this feeling that, we have created a two-layer society. The rich seems to be getting away, and the burdens of changing behavior seems to be on the middle income, on the poor people as well. And until and unless we build trust and cohesiveness among ourselves, whatever policy, whatever narrative that we want to bring is always going to have an element of distrust and tension and stress within the community. So you spoke about equality of opportunity and everything, Tan Sri. But how do we create this narrative and bring people and create awareness and try to actually remove those barriers of trust between these layers of society, at least in Malaysia, Tan Sri? Please.
I think you touched on something that is so critical. The success of whether we come out of this pandemic is very dependent on us trusting each other to come out of it together, right? And the pandemic is not won on vaccines alone. It's also won on people taking behavioral steps to alter their behaviors. You can be vaccinated, but if you don't, observe public health measures, then the chances are, the virus will affect you again. So unfortunately, in Malaysia, I think we have to be not naive and acknowledge that there is a huge trust deficit at many, many levels, for the public to, our interpersonal relationships within our communities, with the politics, with private sector, with the divide between wealthy and rich. Now, how do we get out of that? It's very difficult. It does require, I almost feel we need a reparation process, like a process where we need to admit, first of all, we have a problem, and second, measures one by one to see how we can rebuild trust. I talk a lot about young people because I believe the solutions lie in them. It must begin from education. I think the narrative has to be one woven from very young, through education, through a strong education system. And, each of the stakeholders, if they say they're doing something, they need to do it.
Okay, Tan Sri, I think that's about the time that we have. I think you share a lot of thoughts. If I can just sum up for the audience, I think we spoke about a very positive narrative here about the change that we have to undertake in terms of making the world a better place. I think Tan Sri spoke about many things, but let me just end by saying this. We have survived many crises before. I think even worse than this. We had World War, and then we have, the Spanish flu. In fact, many more millions of people have died in the past. But somehow we managed to get together and figure out the solutions and, created a better world. And now with the technology that we have, with the financing capability that we have, with the instrument, with the institution, with the clever people, so on and so forth. And I'm sure we will recover from this. But however, recovery means that we take the opportunity. Because when we have problems, people will come together, people will get together, and people will start thinking that, how do we can create a better future, not only for this generation, but for future generations as well. So, and we don't want to have the same conversation again, 10 years down the road, we're going to have another problem, and we're going to have a discussion that have we missed the boat again and again. So again, for people who are listening, for younger generation, Tan Sri, even for me, like a role model, I think she has done so many great things to inspire us. So I think the younger one, like Tan Sri have mentioned, we need to take up the baton and say, okay, we can do better. We're going to create a much more positive narrative. We're going to be more optimistic. We're going to build better institutions. We're going to have a better playbook. So I think those are some of the positive that I took from today's discussion. But the most important thing is that I think we can coin a new term, crisis financing. I think instead of just using the word social financing, we can really coin a new term, saying that, okay, what are the tools that require in terms of crisis financing? How to preempt crisis, how to be prepared for it, and how to create an ecosystem so that we can actually implement faster and faster. So those mechanism and ecosystem has to be thought through now, so that when we have it in the future, everyone is ready, the leadership, the ecosystem, the players, and so on and so forth. So that points to very interesting discussion that we might have with the actual players after this. So please stay on. And again, Tan Sri, again, always a privilege. Let me know when you are coming to Qatar. You've been very instrumental in terms of the youth development for football and everything as well. So Qatar is waiting for you. So I'm more than happy to host you here.
Yeah, right. I'm not even a football fan, but I'm involved in the World Cup. But anyway, thank you very much. Prophet Iskandar, it's been a real pleasure speaking to you. Thank you so much. Assalamu alaikum.
Thanks, Tan. Take care. Have a good day, Tan Sri. Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you, Tan Sri Jamila and Dr. Iskandar. We will now have a quick break and a friendly reminder to our viewers to complete our feedback survey below in the live updates section. Let us know what you think. We will be back shortly for session 2.
At Bursa Malaysia, we give you access to all kinds of doors, so you can profit from all kinds of opportunities. You'll find doors that lead to businesses as old as the land itself. Doors that open to the future and the wealth of opportunities that await. Some doors open multiple pathways for you and for everyone else. And they are supported by the doors that unlock the energy that powers everyday life. There are doors to solutions that are good for people and the planet. And doors that hold new ideas, new ways of connecting data that can change everything we think we know. There are even doors that empower everyone through values that are fair, just, and transparent. While others bring the world to us to shape our brightest minds, you can open doors that take you across the world with just a click, or give you access to the economic roots of the ASEAN. We connect businesses and investors of all sizes. At Bursa Malaysia, businesses raise funds and gain visibility, while investors seize opportunities to grow their wealth. Trust and rely on us. Open the doors, step in, and create the impact you seek. Bursa Malaysia, creating opportunities, growing value.
Governments and businesses across the globe have set a clear objective to reach net zero emissions by 2050. Failing to do so could have catastrophic consequences for our planet and our future.
I think the science is pretty clear, and if we needed a wake-up call on how clear that science is, I think the last 18 months has shown us all how fragile the world economy is to a natural event. COP26 is very pivotal in bringing public sector and private sector together, and that's the difference on this COP versus the previous one. Putting tangible plans in place to make it become a reality, to work together to achieve those solutions. Public sector funding alone can't solve this problem. It requires private sector to match with the public sector activity to provide the funding necessary. For HSBC to become a net zero bank, we really have to help our clients transition their business models to a net zero position. We've quantified that that could involve somewhere between $750 billion and $1 trillion of incremental financing activity over the next 10 years for HSBC alone. We believe it's better to help our customers by helping their investment programs and funding their investment programs so that they become net zero, and then the banking sector is the summation of their activities. We're very fortunate that scientists of the world have found us a roadmap out of COVID. We may not have a roadmap out of a climate event. I don't think we can put the world at risk for a climate event and not have a solution or try and solve that problem. And that's the way I look at it. If I then look at it as the CEO of the bank, I also look at it as a huge opportunity. And let me give you one perspective. We as an institution have been around for 156 years. We've seen the industrial landscape of the world change in that 156 years many, many times. I personally believe we're about to see the next industrial transformation take place, where industries are reinvented, technologies are created that solve the problem of climate. But to do that, we have to corral the industry and make it become a reality. We can't wait for somebody else to do it. We have to grab it and make it become a reality. Public sector funding alone can't solve this problem. It requires private sector to provide the funding necessary. We've quantified that that could involve somewhere between $750 billion and $1 trillion of incremental financing activity over the next 10 years for HSBC alone. We're about to see the next industrial transformation take place, where industries are reinvented, technologies are created that solve the problem of climate.
Assalamualaikum and welcome back everyone to the second session of our SID Series 4. In this panel session, we will explore the topic of sustainable and inclusive post-pandemic recovery through Islamic economics and ESG principles. In this session, we will highlight on how to maximizing the role of Islamic finance in promoting sustainable and inclusive Islamic economic system, reducing vulnerability and pursuing a promising future for all through sustainability and ESG, empowering integration of sustainability and ESG factors in Islamic finance to accelerate the transition towards inclusive recovery. We will be joined again by Dr. Iskandar as our moderator alongside our panelists, Assistant Professor Dr. Ziad Mohammed, Associate Dean Director and also the Executive Education and E-Learning of International Center for Education in Islamic Finance, INSEF, and Raja Amir Shah Raja Azwa, Chief Executive Officer of HSBC Amanah Malaysia Berhad. A brief background on our notable panelists. Assistant Professor Dr. Ziad Mohammed is the former Associate Dean of E-Learning and Director of Executive Education at INSEF and is currently Lead Researcher in Shariah for the Center of Excellence in Social Finance at INSEF. He is also leading the implementation of MICRA, an e-learning platform at INSEF that makes Islamic finance education available to the public through produced short courses. He holds a PhD and CIFP from INSEF in Malaysia, an MBA from Mancosa in South Africa, and a BA in Business Finance from ARU in the UK. He also holds certification in Islamic law from South Africa and Jordan. He was Managing Director of a boutique consultancy in Sharia advisory since 2006, after serving as National Head of Marketing and Product Development at Al Barakah Bank, South Africa. Dr. Ziad specializes in Sharia, Islamic capital markets, fintech, and social finance. His research areas include fintech, sukuk announcement effects, the use of Islamic social finance instruments for disaster relief, and economic empowerment and customer behavior in Islamic finance. He serves as chairman of several Sharia boards internationally, including the Sharia Committee of HSBC Amanah, Malaysia, Taj Bank, Nigeria, iConsult Africa, Iman, Uzbekistan, FBN Quest Asset Managers, Nigeria, and 117 Capital, Nigeria. He is also a Shariah board member of BML Islamic Maldives. He has provided advisory and subject matter expertise to Kazakhstan, the UK, the Philippines, and Nigeria, amongst others. Raja Amin Shah Raja Azwa was appointed as Chief Executive Officer of HSBC Amanah in May 2021 and is responsible for executing the HSBC Group's strategy for Islamic banking in Malaysia, driving sustainable leadership and value-based intermediation efforts while spearheading the development of talent, particularly in relation to Islamic finance and sustainability within the group. Prior to his appointment, Raja Amin was the head of Debt Capital Markets Malaysia. He has made many material contributions to the development of the international and Malaysian sukuk market, having originated, structured, and executed multiple first-to-market landmark sukuk transactions across Asia for both corporates, financial institutions, and the public sector. More recently, Raja Amin led the government of Malaysia's $800 million sustainability sukuk, being the world's first ever sustainability sukuk by a sovereign. He started his career in London in the tech industry with a 1&1 Limited and moved to RHB Investment Bank in 2006. Thereafter, he joined HSBC Amanah in 2010 and have since held various roles within the International Currency Business Unit and Debt Capital Markets team. Throughout his time with the Debt Capital Markets team, HSBC has been consistently awarded the Best Bond House Global by the Asset AAA Country Awards. Raja Amin is also in charge of delivering Project Cocoon, an initiative to transform HSBC Amanah into HSBC Group's first sustainable bank by the end of 2022. We will now proceed with the panel session as moderated by Dr. Iskandar.
Again, good morning, good evening, good afternoon, depends on where you are. Again, thank you so much. So we are in part 2 now. So we talked to policymakers, Tan Sri, more at the macro level. So now we're going to go into the crux of the matter. So with me, we have two prominent speakers. First one is a good friend of mine too, ex-colleague, Dr. Ziad. Dr. Ziad, good to have you. And also we have CEO of HSBC Amanah, Raja Amin. I was told that he also was an alumni. He's also an alumni of INSEF too. So one thing that all three of us have in common is that, you know, one way or another, we are related to INSEF. So perhaps this might sound like an INSEF sessions and also HSBC sessions as well, perhaps, because one, we have a CEO of HSBC Amanah, and we also have the chairman of the Shariah board of HSBC Amanah as well. So, but let's try to make the discussion a bit more, you know, broader, general and everything, not representing the opinion of any institutions. So first, Dr. Ziad, let me, you know, put these questions to you. I think you heard what Tan Sri have said. So I just want to continue from that discussion, just to start the conversation going. So the point is that every time we had this opportunity, and Tan Sri was saying that we didn't do enough, we probably haven't optimized the instruments that we have, you know, and you were, you know, championing social finance for many years. In fact, you know, you had a project in terms of optimizing zakat, wakaf and everything, and preparing, you know, Islamic finance for something like this. So now the question is that, have we not done enough? Or have we done bare minimum? Or so where do we go from here, you know, from your perspective?
Thank you very much, Prof. Iskandar. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa salatu wa salamu ala Sayyidil Mursaleen. Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ajma'een. Amma ba'd. Thank you very much for the opportunity. And certainly it is as always a pleasure to listen to Tan Sri, Dr. Jamila. We've worked together, you know, trying to push forward social finance, Islamic social finance in particular. And yes, I agree that it is quite disheartening to see that we have not learned from our mistakes. But human beings are such that we need some time. You know, we need a few knocks on the head before we really understand the gravity of the situation. And then before we start making changes. So I want to say first that disruption is good. Disruption is good in that, as you mentioned earlier, it gives us an opportunity to reset. to rethink, to recalibrate, and now to restructure and re-strategize so that we can move forward, we can move ahead. Has Islamic finance achieved its ideals? Well, I have to say that if we identify the ideals first and we measure them, then that would be a very objective approach. If we say that we assumed or presumed that Islamic finance was about socio-economic empowerment and upliftment, and it was through the pure Islamic economic dealings, and that was the objective, then we'd have to say that it has fallen short of its ultimate objective of lifting people up from poverty. But if we say that Islamic finance's ideals were also around supporting the middle income sector and growing businesses and providing capital and sources of funding in a halal way, then we'd have to say that Islamic finance has actually achieved its mark. So it's all about what we presumed Islamic finance would achieve for us. If we thought it was a silver bullet and suddenly we'd be able to eradicate poverty and all Muslim nations around the world, or in fact, the entire world would now be uplifted from poverty because Islamic finance came in and was the elixir for all the corruption and all of the problems we had, then perhaps that presumption would have already been a bit far-fetched. So what I'm saying is, let's ensure that we rationalize our objectives and our ideals, our perceptions of what Islamic finance was to achieve. This does not undermine what Islamic finance should achieve for the next 5 to 10 to 20 years, which is certainly socio-economic empowerment and upliftment.
Okay, Dr. Ziad, before I move to Raja Amin, let me just have a follow-up question. So you were mentioning that, our expectation have to be realistic, and we had this conversation, many times as well, how, we can build the Islamic finance together at ISEF last time. So we were talking about, okay, first let's transform the main institution, the banking, the capital market. And then you always mention to me is that, but eventually it's going to be mainstreaming social finance. So now we have a great opportunity. I think the crisis has presented the opportunity to show that, just transforming the institutions like banking, capital market and everything, if you don't show a positive outcome at the society level, people will not buy your story anymore. Maybe the playbook is not enough. So the question right now is that, how do we mainstream social finance? How do we say that this is not just about distributing justice, but this is actually preparing and filling up all the loose ends so that Islamic finance narrative will be much more wider and acceptable by the audience? So this challenge that, Islamic finance is not doing enough, is just replicating conventional finance. So we can put this argument, to bed once and for all. So please, Dr. Ziad.
Agreed. So if we take a step back, what we are saying is that Islamic finance is an ecosystem. It is not a single entity of retail banking that's supporting one segment of the market. Islamic finance is also about investment banking at the higher level and venture capital, which really epitomizes the risk-sharing principle. But below the retail banking scenario is your DFI, your development finance institutions. And this is more in line with the social objectives and socio-economic objectives. Now, what we're saying is, and you're quite right, we're saying that if Islamic finance were to go back to its roots and go back to the spirit of Islamic finance, then we need to establish more institutions around social finance. And what does it need to become mainstream? It needs all our experts that are so smart and innovative in financial engineering and know how to structure, murabaha and diminishing musharaka. They would now need to utilize those expertise to mobilize original social finance, classical social finance instruments in order to achieve maximum output. And that means sukuk that is linked with waqf, sukuk that is linked with blended financing that incorporates zakat and takaful, looking at zakat at the investment level, looking at social finance for infrastructure, So this is there. We have the expertise at the basic level, but if there is a specialization in these types of skills, we will now see social finance becoming more mainstream, not just a charity that is sidelined into a CSR niche at a bank, at an Islamic bank or other institution. It now becomes the playbook, as you said, and it means that we have to focus on something that Malaysia has really stressed upon, and that's value-based intermediation, value creation, and a corporate value intent that integrates this whole mindset shift into responsibility and sustainability, which means it's not just social finance institution doing social finance. It is every institution in the ecosystem that has integrated an element of responsibility, sustainability, and social finance within it.
Okay, Dr. Ziad, let me just give you a break for a while, and let me move to Encik Raja Amir. First of all, I want to take this opportunity to congratulate on your appointment as well. So never get a chance. You made INSEF very proud of your achievement, but inshallah you're going to do even more at HSBC Amanah. Encik Amir, my question to you is that, related to what Dr. Ziad says, but I focus more on social finance with Dr. Ziad. So now let me move to the agenda of sustainability. So again, people are harping on sustainability. It's going to be new narratives. So a lot of players are actually jumping to the bandwagon and everything. So how does this idea of sustainability is actually creating a positive narrative for banking players, and how do you see that this can be a role in terms of creating an impact to the society and also to your stakeholders? Amir?
Thank you, Dr. Iskandar. Assalamualaikum. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Thank you for having me here today, and thank you for the congratulations as well. In relation to your question, how does it incentivize stakeholders and players alike? I mean, I've been listening to some of the discourse which has been happening before this, and indeed there is the age-old argument of whether we're doing enough, and whether Islamic finance is really rising to the occasion, things like this. And if I can just take a leaf, from the perspective of a practitioner, and I've only come into this job fairly recently, so I've been on the ground executing some of these transactions. So I mean, what I can say is, just to answer your question in terms of the incentivizing the workforce. So this topic is obviously top of mind for a lot of people. And when we talk about value-based intermediation, when we talk about what the regulator is laying out for Islamic banks and using Islamic banks as the base for to test pilot this value-based intermediation, it's definitely something which is resonating with people. I mean, a lot of people feel very closely to this topic. We've talked about the young people carrying the torch forward. So this is something which means a lot to a lot of people, and it's important that we keep on going beyond what we've started. Obviously, we have conventional finance, as we all know, is it's basically a risk return analysis and profit driven. But at the end of the day, it's something which is, by blending religion with finance, that's already one form of way which resonates with a lot of people, and that's also how I myself got into Islamic finance. But now when we open up that sphere to a wider base, which is now incorporating sustainability, that really hits home with a lot of people. And I can tell you that, for example, just when we opened up a job opportunity in HSBC for somebody to help lead Project Cocoon, which is something that I will talk about in the next section, the demand was overwhelming. And some of when we were interviewing people for the role, I was really blown away to see that, people feel very strongly about this. They want to go over and beyond. They're like, how can we reduce paper now, today? How do we do things now? And how do we go beyond what has been pledged? So definitely this is stimulating a lot of people within the industry. And it's also bringing, talent as well into the discourse. Previously people before would say, okay, Islamic finance is Shariah related. I don't want to be involved. The more interesting things would be structuring. But now, because Islamic finance is synonymous with ESG and essentially looking out for a better planet, it really is bringing talent towards Islamic banks.
So Raja Amir, we're talking about incentivizing, but again the question is that, like what Tan Sri has pointed out, is that Okay, so we need a proper playbook. So what is exactly the playbook by the industry right now? I mean, is it just, trying to make an impact? Or is it like you are getting seriously involved in the policy discussions as well, pushing the government towards, listening to what banks got to say as a whole? Or this is just more of an individual effort, like, oh, HSBC Amanah is doing it, but it's not being echoed by other banks. So what is the situations now in the banking industry? So VBI is one, but now some people are saying, I mean, sorry to provoke you, but people are saying that VBI may not be enough. We need a bigger playbook, bigger financing, bigger agenda. So what is your take on, making this whole idea even bigger and, more important, especially in the context of Malaysia? I mean.
Yeah, I mean, so when we talk about Malaysia, I mean, Malaysia is very, I've looked at a number of markets, but, Malaysia is very regulatory driven. So definitely it's not just about, us going solo on this effort. It's really, Bank Negara is really pushing hard on this agenda. And that's also making the discussion with clients much easier. Because, when you have the regulator telling you that, by next year, you're going to have to report based on your essentially you have to the climate-based taxonomy, which has been rolled out by Bank Negara, and by next year we are going to have to stress test our books, in terms of what is the effect on our clients based on a change in climate. So we're going to need to look at what is the impact to client A, client B, as a result of a change in the overall temperature, and what is that going to how is that going to affect us? So definitely this is, I mean, it's not about us riding solo. It's not about, just the topic of the day. It's really the regulator is driving this agenda. And even within Bursa Malaysia as well, you can see that they've even, amended the corporate governance guidelines to ensure that KPIs of senior executives are tied against sustainability measures. So you can see that from a regulator-driven perspective, I mean, things like, not only do we need to stress test now for movements in underlying rates, or changes in benchmarks, for example, or whether the U.S. Treasuries are sitting, we're now going to need to stress test for our book, and I think that is that is sending a strong message. And when we speak to clients, and a lot of clients are taken aback by how quickly things are moving. I mean, we must understand what kind of economy do we have, right? We're an export-oriented economy, we're a commodities-based economy, and these players need support within the context of this orderly transition. So that's why Bank Negara has termed the coin an orderly transition, and how do we support the players in the interim?
Okay, but before I go back to Dr. Ziad, I just have one question. Is that, I mean, if it's a regulatory driven and you issued sustainability sukuk, it was oversubscribed, then people on the street might say, I mean, if this is so good and it's regulatory driven and it's oversubscribed and there are a lot of excitement out there, so why don't we do more? I mean, why we are.
That's the plan. I mean, that's the plan. So the government of Malaysia, and again, I must commend them, because it was not an easy issuance to begin with, right? So Republic of Indonesia has issued 3 green sukuk before this, and when we talk to the government of Malaysia, obviously it's something which is daunting. It's not easy. You need to report, on a yearly basis, how have you allocated the funds, what are the qualifying projects, and when you deal with international second-party opinion providers, I mean, we have an agenda, nationally, which they may not resonate with, right? So when, we will talk about sustainable farming, things like this, we use pesticide and things like that, they don't allow you to use the money for that. If you say it's sustainable farming, what exactly are you using? If you say you're using the money for green building, what, are you using LEED standards? So LEED standards may not necessarily be relevant for a tropical country, which would be using more, GBI related methods. So I mean, yes, that issuance was a great step in hopefully more things to come, and it really needs to be driven from the top. So when you see the country issuing a sustainable sukuk, then naturally the other players, the GLCs and the respective other corporates in the market as well would be incentivized to follow suit.
Okay, so I'll go back to Dr. Ziad now. So Doc, so interesting thoughts. So let's now talk about resetting. Okay, moving forward. All right. So enough of the problems. All right. So there are debate out there, or the discussion is that Islamic banking seems to be quite stagnant now. For the last 2-3 years, the growth has become, plateauing at about 2 to 3% of the total market share. On the other hand, sustainability is growing. All right, halal economy is growing. The need for example, crisis financing is growing. So a lot of narrative that being put forward in terms of the need of maqasid, a need of better way of doing things, and so on and so forth. So now the question is that why these things are not up and up? Why on the other hand there seems to be more need towards what we call as a fairness, justice-based, principle-based system. But on the other hand, when it goes to the data and the market size, it seems that it's not growing enough. Are we not having enough instruments, or are we still lack in terms of regulatory requirement, or what else that we're supposed to do in terms of, again, I'm using the word, creating a holistic situations for the system that we have today, lah, Dr. Ziad. Please.
Yeah, I mean that's the million-dollar question. I don't believe it's an issue of the lack of instruments, because there has been substantial innovation in Islamic banking and finance. In fact, this is a criticism on Islamic finance that sometimes it's too innovative in the way it structures its instruments. But perhaps we go back to the core of the matter. First, Islamic finance is not, a mature sector. It is maturing at different levels in different jurisdictions. And we know that we have approximately 15 countries that have Islamic finance as systemic, which means in excess of 15%. But even those countries are still overcoming obstacles, hurdles. We say the famous issue is that we're forcing square peg into round hole. We're forcing an Islamic finance principle or set of principles around maqasid and the protections, etc., into a secular conventional set of regulations. And this in itself takes a lot of time, takes a lot of effort, and is very costly. But let's say now we look at countries that have already overcome this, like countries like Malaysia and Bahrain and the Emirates and Saudi Arabia. These are the leading countries in Islamic finance development. So why still do we not see that major shift? Well, I think Brother Raja Amir already mentioned that by releasing sustainability-linked sukuk and focusing on the issues around value-based intermediation sustainability, then it requires certain champions. It requires certain institutions, certain regulators to really hold up the flag and say, well, there is a leader in this field, in this sector, and there's a champion, and really we should unify around this champion to implement it, to replicate it in our own jurisdictions, and try to enhance it and improve it and come up with something better. So just to summarize, what I'm saying is you need a full ecosystem, but you still need a champion. And this means that regulators will play an important role, institutions will be the leaders in their business sector, customers will be the champions and the leaders in their own business sectors. So each sector has its champion, each sector has its leadership. And then we need to look at benchmarks. We need to look at who's really been successful already. It's not true to say that all Islamic banking has been stagnant. That would be unfair. We've seen brand new innovations in Indonesia, the green sukuk, the sustainability-linked sukuk, the waqf sukuk. So these are innovations that can be replicated. Besides sukuk, we've seen Islamic fintech and crowdfunding. We've seen social finance marry with fintech and Islamic base. So there are a lot of examples that we can pick up from around the world. It's providing these as benchmarks, replicating those, and actually moving forward. You will see a more unified progress. But I must say, Prof. Iskandar, it's not very easy to do this in many of the OIC countries, as Dr. Jamila mentioned, because they are still trying to overcome their own challenges of currency volatility and political instability and high levels of unemployment. So it's not, Islamic banking is here to save the day on everything. It has to be seen in context. There are many institutions and components that must contribute to see Islamic banking and finance really flourish.
Doc, I just have, I'm not trying to be critical here. I mean, for the sake of Are you afraid that Islamic finance might lose its identity under the emblem of sustainability?
No, I think it will gain, it will actually establish its identity and emphasize what it really stands for under the emblem of sustainability. I agree that, and I believe there was a question earlier around this. I agree that Islamic finance has not held up its part effectively around sustainability. But we must also accept that Islamic finance came in at a stage 1 of sustainability, which was identifying negative screens. And the way Islamic finance identified negative screens happened to be better in practice and in principle and application than most others, than even the conventional. But what has happened is that's where we have been stagnant. We didn't move quickly enough into the next stage, the positive screens. So whereas you had Islamic Sharia screening for equities being the umbrella, it now becomes a subset of ESG. And it has to reclaim that by espousing or really embracing the positive screening methodology to support businesses to actually become more responsible. And really everything is in the Sharia. It's just creating measures. There must be measurables to implement it successfully within the positive screening stage. So I don't think it's an unfair criticism, it's a fair criticism.
So just last point, Dr. Ziad, and we are running out of time, so we have to go back to Raja Amin. Just last point. So are you saying that we need to change the narrative of Islamic finance? Because if you look at sustainability narrative, it's very clear. All the reports that are being done, they talk about the issues, they talk about the, suggestions, they talk about how to measure those suggestions. So it's more positive, practical based. Okay. So people might say Islamic finance more principle and conceptual based. Right? So it's more focusing on, compliance as compared to the impact. And when sustainability focusing more in impact, they come up with a better measurement. Impact, they're coming up with the integrated reporting and everything. So it's easier to understand. It's much more acceptable. So, and you are saying that, there must be a transition between this and that. So now the question is that transition is happening, or are we still boiled down to the same concept that we were talking about 10 and 15 years ago?
I don't believe that we are still in that position of 10 to 15 years ago. Of course, I can talk about the institutions that we support in terms of advisory and supervisory. We no longer limit it to compliance. It's no longer a simple checklist of whether you've complied with the letter of the law. And we've quickly moved it into the spirit of the law, which means that introducing instruments that are focused on high net worth individuals should have an alternative for those of the lower income, to ensure that introducing one type of instrument will not create and increase the inequality gap. This is not an original letter of the law compliance approach. This is a spirit of the law, what the Sharia stands for, the maqasid approach. And it is all very clear in the jurisprudence. It is not something that we are creating or innovating or trying to compete with sustainability. This has its foundation already strongly in the Sharia. The circulation of wealth, the ensuring that there is socio-economic empowerment, there is an establishment of very clear guidelines when it comes to contracts to make sure both parties succeed. So it's a win-win. And let's not forget the most crucial element here. This must be done in a responsible way, in a way that all creation, environment, animals, everyone is protected in this pursuit of profit or success. We'll call it falah, which is more the term in Islamic economics, a true success that will ultimately achieve the pleasure of Almighty Allah.
The reason I asked that question, Dr. Ziad, is that because once you find a meeting common ground, and it's quite easy to create a positive narrative. So that's what, like Raja Amin had mentioned, when you talk about sustainability, it's quite easy to find a common ground, and it's quite easy to push a similar narrative. So similar narrative will mean that global acceptance and so on and so forth. So that's the reason I'm asking this. I know the kind of work that you've been doing at INSEF, a lot of work that, is happening, so on and so forth. But unfortunately, when you read the debate, sometimes at a much more broader stage, we're still pointing out some of the fundamental issues that perhaps should be resolved many, many years ago. Okay? But anyway, let me move to Raja Amin. This session will not be complete unless you share, some of your own initiative, so that it can become, maybe inspiration or guidance for other players to follow, or maybe, to draw some, I would probably say parallel to what some of the initiative that you're doing, Raja Amin. So if you don't mind, maybe you may want to share some of the things that you guys are doing at HSBC Amanah.
Thank you, Doctor. If I can just, I think it's generally been, it's common knowledge that HSBC Amanah is on a 24-month journey at the moment now. And what is this journey? This journey essentially is to convert our operations into being deemed as a sustainable bank by 2022. Now, again, if I can just go back slightly to, why was HSBC Amanah selected, or why did we put up our hand rather, to be the pilot for this particular, endeavor, which some people would say is audacious, some people, would say it's overtly ambitious. And really, when we spoke, or rather my predecessors spoke with, with the powers that be in Hong Kong, it was argued that being an Islamic bank, we would be the best institution within the HSBC group for us to be the pilot to roll out this program to become a fully sustainable bank. So when you say what exactly is a fully sustainable bank? So currently, we ourselves are within the context of value-based intermediation. And again, this is something which is being rolled out for Islamic banks. So even conventional banks do not subscribe to VBI at the moment. It's a test case within the Islamic banks because the synergy between what the Maqasid, what being a Khalifa on the earth is about, and what Islamic banks are supposed to or are doing. What exactly is the situation is that we are now looking into our portfolio. So we have a portfolio of advances in financing, and we've said in our non-financial disclosure, which we've made, which is the first in the Malaysian market, we've put ourselves out there and we've said that we will be a fully sustainable bank as measured by our advances and financings to determine that 51% of that amount is tagged to people, prosperity, and the planet. So again, when you do a green or a sustainable sukuk, it's very clear what you need to follow. There are prescribed guidelines. What is sustainability? What qualifies as social? But when you are trying to comply with the guideline which says people, prosperity, and the planet, there's various things that you are looking into in order for you to be able to say that. So within our retail book, which forms the majority of our advances and financing, we are now looking at what was the use of proceeds by the people who took the financing from us. What was their economic status? Were they buying the property for the first time? Are they from the B50 category? Did they use the money for something which is social good? Did they use it to refurbish a clinic? Did they use it to educate their children, for example? So we are now going into, that data is not really readily available. So we are having to manually extract each and every single client and see what they use the money for. And that's on the retail side, covering mortgages, the loans, the personal loans book, and the credit card. Now on the corporate and wholesale space, we are now looking into how do we classify corporates as being ESG compliant. There's a plethora of different providers of ESG data, and we've looked at quite a large number of them, and we have now established a baseline for what we feel is an acceptable threshold. Which industry does that particular client fall in? Are they in an environmentally sensitive industry, such as oil and gas, aeronautical engineering, construction, or are they in a non-environmentally sensitive sector? So we then look at the ESG scores provided by some of these data providers. FTSE Russell is one of them. And then we send a benchmark as what do we accept as being in compliance with the triple bottom line. So that's for clients who are public listed, clients who have ESG scores. For those clients who do not have any scores, then what do you do with them? Right? How do you say company B, who is a smallish company who does not have who has a rating? What do we do with them? So we then send out a bunch of questionnaires to these companies where we then take off, do they comply? Are they doing significant harm to the economy? Things like this to determine whether or not the client is in that stage of transition or are they not there yet? And this also jives with what Bank Negara is also doing, because as I mentioned, they're rolling out the climate-based taxonomy, ultimately with the aim to find out, is the company or is the transaction doing significant harm? Is there reduction in greenhouse gas emissions and so on? So within this context, we're in the midst of drafting our taxonomy. 51% of the book needs to be in compliance by December 2022, inshallah. And we're on that journey. And I can tell you it's not an easy journey because, as we all know, this is currently the pandemic situation. Companies are thinking about their survival, thinking about their cash flows. So to have that conversation with the company is not really top of their mind at the moment. So incentivizing them to do it, guiding them to do it is something which is not easy, and which is we take on that challenge, inshallah, to do that. And within that context also, we have rolled out a number of products. I won't go through the full suite of them, but a number that I would like to call out is such as our ESG credit card. We've talked about social financing. For every donation that you make on a HSBC Amanah credit card, HSBC will match that donation with 1%. And that goes to, not just any charity, it goes to certain charities which have high impact. So you have your Yayasan Chakit, you have your various orphanages which are part of this program. So there's many sort of products that we're rolling out, looking at green mortgages, looking at carbon exchange. And inshallah, we will, this is a challenge that, we take on. People have asked me, will you then not be financing, polluting industries? And my answer to that is not, we're not looking to, move away from those industries in the interim. We're looking to work with people in that transition journey. We acknowledge it's not an easy thing to do. We ourselves have issued a sustainable sukuk. And I always find it much easier to have a conversation with people when you yourself have walked through, when you have actually undertaken that burden. So we issued that sukuk. We are now matching those funds to projects which align with the UN SDGs. And inshallah, wish us luck. We're on that journey. And hopefully by December 2022, we can have good news for everybody.
Okay. But before I let you go, I just have to ask this. The elephant in the room. People always say that you might be less profitable if you do this. It might become more costlier to do this. So how do you respond to that, Rajami?
That's a great question, Iskandar. Whenever I see a financing coming through our book, right, immediately I say, okay, what is the, where's the client in the whole ESG score, right? Do they qualify? Do they not? So what are we doing now? Do we at the expense of not growing assets, do we then forego that particular financing? So, well, so it's a journey, as I say. Phase 1.0 of Project Cocoon is to achieve 51%. In the future, we could go higher. And I think that, if you look at the examples of companies which have moved, I'm not talking about banks now, but companies who have moved to ESG-related business models, right? You can actually see, and also those data which tracks the investing into a portfolio of ESG compliant companies, for example, the returns have outperformed a similar portfolio which is not ESG compliant. There's a number of case studies we could talk about companies who moved to the whole life cycle of circular economy, and in the earlier years they faced a lot of pain and burden as they started to convince their suppliers, their whole supply chain, I need you to do things differently. And, that will obviously drive up costs. But in the long run, obviously, there's innovation in there. You need to differentiate yourself from people, not just because you're doing sustainability, but you need to be innovative in your products. The returns did eventually stack up, and, that case was there. So at the expense of, it's definitely a delicate balance to play, and obviously not one which is enviable. But inshallah, as we move towards that sort of, equilibrium between sustainability and profit, it can't be that sole thing which is on our mind at the moment. So I would need to stand up to that when I get questioned. This is something that we're on, and hopefully that will be a game changer for us and also bring in more business because people want to learn and grow together with us.
Thank you. I think that will give assurance to many players out there. So now we are in the final part of the sessions. So questions from the audience. Up to you guys, whoever wants to take these questions. There are 3 questions from the audience. We have another probably 5 to 6 minutes, if I'm not wrong. Maybe this one I can address to Dr. Ziad. We are now almost 2 years since the start of the pandemic. What Islamic finance or sustainability tools in Malaysia or elsewhere have been implemented in response to the pandemic that can serve as an example?
Okay, I mean, that's a valid question. And there are several instruments that have been implemented. So here, social finance has taken the focus, and there have been, specifically around zakat, you find that there have been specifically injections of zakat to deserving recipients, focusing around the micro and nano enterprises. Now, as you know, the SME sector has suffered significantly during pandemic, and they have required funds with no strings attached, not loans, but funds that they could use and pay off, salaries, working capital, etc., and continue to survive. So this, as you know, is also referred to as situational poverty. We now have zakat that we are giving to these groups of individuals and this sector of business, whereas prior to pandemic, there would not be any thought of this approach. But what has also happened is all of these instruments have actually become digitized. So a very quick, push to make sure that you are playing on a digital platform. And this has helped from a fintech Islamic social finance perspective to increase the amount of collection of zakat, etc. out there, because it gives access to donors, to payers, to especially millennials who want to contribute but don't want to go through the inconvenience of going to a bank branch, etc. So yes, we have seen Islamic instruments really benefit in terms of empowerment, etc. during pandemic, but they have really seen success through distribution channels that have been empowered and enabled by digital frameworks. The bigger picture is that you had sukuk, sustainability sukuk that have been issued, a larger focus on sustainability sukuk. There are gaps. And those gaps, as Dr. Jamila mentioned, we still don't have another issuance of funding for vaccines, which is just really mind-boggling when we have so many nations within the OIC that require it. So, there are two sides to the coin. There's positive, of course, with the contribution of zakat, waqf, etc. But on the other hand, the bigger gaps around vaccination has really not been fulfilled adequately, unfortunately.
Okay, we got 4 more minutes, and I just have 2 quick questions for Encik Raja Amir. What incentive in terms of financing HSBC Amanah is offering to its clients to promote ESG adoptions? And the other one, which I will also think related, how do you set the baseline? Is it science-driven through setting of activity thresholds and metrics? So it's very specific to HSBC Amanah. So I'm sure Encik Raja Amir is probably the best person to answer. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Doctor. So in terms of what incentives are we offering? So, I mean, that's obviously, an important question and something that a lot of people will be asking us. And what incentives? So essentially now we're working on a relief program for a number of initiatives, one being for financing. So for any financing, which is qualifiable in terms of whether it complies with a certain matrix or whether it is certified as being sustainable, we potentially can offer a certain basis point saving on that particular financing. Now, I can't comment further because this is currently underway, but essentially we are working on a portfolio, a sizable portfolio within the commercial banking sector of our business, which allows us to deploy financing at a preferential rate should that particular financing qualify. And in terms of are we setting science-based metrics? I mean, that's a very good question, but again, it depends on what kind of financing you are doing. Because, for example, if you are doing a sustainability-linked financing, for example, where the pricing of that particular facility is tied to a certain KPI, then in that respect, definitely there needs to be a science-based matrix. Exactly what is that? It's something which differs from industry to industry. So if I can just say, for example, we've just launched or we just announced a transaction for Yinsen, which is a sustainability-linked sukuk, and they have 3 KPIs, and they're measuring it against their baseline. So what is their greenhouse gas emissions? What is their total emissions coming from flaring, for example? So they have a baseline where it's as at 2021. And they have a target to reach that by 2025. And if they don't achieve that target, and this target again is certified by a second-party opinion provider, which has said that target is indeed it is indeed something which is ambitious. If they meet that, there's a there's a certain basis point reduction. If they don't meet it, then there's an increment. So it really depends on what kind of financing. If you're financing a property development, for example, then there would be a specific KPI. If it's a sustainability-linked financing, then it would be dependent on that particular business and ensuring that there is a matrix which is both ambitious and something which is acceptable to the market. But if you are financing something which is specific, like a supply chain financing, if you're able to, what we did for Guangchong chocolate manufacturers recently, what they did was that they were able to get a certification that this cocoa is from a sustainable source of farming. So it really depends on what kind of financing you're doing and what kind of ambitions you want to show to the market.
All right. Thank you so much, Encik Raja Amin and also Dr. Ziad. So let me just thank both of you. I think it's a great conversation. It's a pleasure. Indeed, we have answered some of the pertinent questions. We can do a lot more, definitely, but steps have been taken. Players are very serious. In fact, we heard from Encik Raja Amin as well. We heard from Dr. Ziad as well. There are a lot of instruments, there are a lot of potential. We just have to bring it to a different level. Again, we can only do that if we have a lot more people, a lot more leadership, a lot more awareness, and a better playbook and so on and so forth. And to do that, people must come together. So I always a person who believes that, crisis present opportunity. In fact, the world got better every time we went through crisis. Just take about Second World War, for example. The world was almost in the brink of destructions. But then we had a better opportunity, more technology now. In fact, with the current technology that we have, no one should be living in poverty. That's the kind of technology that we have, financing opportunity. But we just have to bring it together. We just have to bring like-minded people, whatever we have today, Tan Sri Jamila, Dr. Ziad, and also Encik Raja Amin, and people in INSEF or HBQ or anyone who's actually listening to this. Eventually, this is going to make world better for everyone. So thank you so much again to the organizer for this opportunity. Great conversation. I always look forward to talk about all these things. And inshallah, we will talk about more great things in the future as well. So back to organizer, back to MC, back to Nadira. Thank you guys. Assalamualaikum.
Thank you to Dr. Ziad, Raja Amin and Dr. Iskandar for the robust conversation we just had. We hope to hear many more of your insights in the future. That marks the end of Shariah Investing Dialogue 2021 Series 4. And I'd like to share a few reminders before we leave. Number 1, below on your right, you will see the past and upcoming sessions. You can set a reminder so as not to miss any of our future sessions. Number 2, make sure to leave your rating and feedback by filling up the survey form below under the live updates section. And number 3, you can watch again this session and all past sessions on www.islamicmarkets.com. On behalf of the organizers, Bursa Malaysia, Asas and ISRA, we would like to thank all the speakers, Tan Sri Dr. Jamila, Raja Amin, Dr. Ziad and Dr. Iskandar for making this session a success. Let us know which topic would you like us to discuss next. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdika ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilaik. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Have a good day ahead.